Hey, Ray, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com, and it's been a while since I did a video. Just been busy with a lot of Libertarian Party stuff, and if you want to check out all the stuff that I've been doing, like my Facebook pages and the many places you can find me on social media. So this one I'm doing as sort of just an audio over an image video like I used to, just because I want to make sure I said some things based on some questions that I've gotten. Now, this all came out of the question about someone who is new to the Libertarian Party messaged me, new to libertarianism, and has liked what they've learned, but then struggled with the idea of private prisons due to oftentimes the inhumane conditions that prisoners are kept in. Now, if you've seen shows like Orange is the New Black, this kind of thing is discussed, and there's a legit issue with the way private prisons currently exist. Okay, with the way they currently exist, where there is sort of very big rights abuses. But the fact is, it's the same thing that you see in healthcare, the same thing that you see in education. And the problem isn't that these things are privately run. The problem is that these goods and services are not provided in a market context. Okay? So, and then because what people don't realize is that, it's not just the fact that someone privately runs something that makes a market. It's the fact that you can choose from different providers, that there's sort of an active competitive market. This creates competition, and competition doesn't only mean you're going to create a better product at a better price, but you innovate other things like payment schemes. And I think that's the key thing here. There's no incentives to innovate on the payment scheme. And the payment scheme is what creates all the different incentives, because someone who provides a good or a service are going to optimize based on how they get paid. So if you get paid for every burger I sell you, then my incentive is to sell you more burgers and figure out how to make those burgers cheaper. Okay? So for a good example of how payment schemes get innovated is video rentals. Once upon a time, you'd play Blockbuster for one video. You'd pay like a $5 fee. You'd rent the movie for like 3 days, and you had to pay like an extra $1 for every dollar the movie was late. And that created an incentive for people to watch less movies because it was a cost per movie. So it created a change in the incentives from the consumer level. And from the producer level, it created an incentive to try to get you to watch more movies. Okay, whether you want to or not, and try to create incentives for you. But then someone innovated the payment scheme, like Netflix, where basically they created that subscription model for video rentals. That was a innovation in the payment scheme. They created different incentives. So now from the incentive from the consumer was to watch is more what you want, so the consumer was able to get more value at a lower price. But now, from Netflix's point of view, they don't want you to watch as many movies, so there was no incentive for them to be pushing content as much as more than they do push original content, because the idea is now that there's competitors, they need to have content that kind of gets you into their subscription service. But the idea is that a different payment system caused a different sort of set of tools, set of rules of optimization, etc. So it became less about how do I get you to rent one movie, more than how do I get you to subscribe to a service and optimize that service. So let's examine these three things: private prisons, education, and healthcare, and talk about how their pricing mechanisms, regardless of some of the enterprises within these sectors being privately run, screw up how they work. And the reason why these pricing systems are screwed up is because there isn't a market, because the government doesn't allow a market for these pricing systems to innovate. So first, prisons. So right now, the way a lot of private prisons get paid is they get paid per inmate. So that creates an incentive to, one, maximize the amount you get paid, which means you want to get more inmates and spend less money on those inmates. So that way you make more. So that one creates an incentive for, a lot of times, the private prison industry to lobby for the creation of more crimes and basically build relationships with politicians and make more crimes, because more things that are cold crimes means more inmates. More stricter enforcement of laws means more inmates. And two, one, basically keep people in inhumane conditions, so because that way they can spend as little as possible in running the prison. And the reason things are paid this way is because the politicians' incentives to spend less. Politicians, they receive, they just basically want to be able to go back to their constituents and say, we spent less money. So their incentive, so basically this is in line with so basically you have a situation here where basically you have two parties, and the pricing system is based on the value to the two parties, but not to the third party who's essentially being bargained off here. Okay, now, basically, in a different world, in a more competitive setting, you could maybe renegotiate. So one, if you had an actual, well, let's not explore like sort of a pure free market in justice, meaning, private courts, private law enforcement, all that kind of stuff, because that gets into a much larger conversation, much more theoretical conversation that I really care to get into today. But let's talk about one possible reform. Let's say you change the way these contracts were with the prisons. Let's say instead of getting paid based on how many inmates they had, they were paid a block amount based on recidivism rate. So basically, if your recidivism, meaning how often do those inmates that were in your building or in your jails ended up being back in jail. So basically, you say, okay, well, you'll get paid this much if your recidivism rate is this low, meaning basically people leave, they're rehabilitated, they're able to get jobs, they don't end up back in jail. If your recidivism rates grow, then that payment you get grows less and less and less. So now, in order to optimize payment, you need to rehabilitate prisoners. Okay? Now, of course, there's logistical difficulties in how you measure this and when do the payments come in. And these are things that need to be innovated and discussed and developed. But the idea is if you were paid based on results, okay, then you end up having a different incentive. The idea is, how do I make these inmates rehabilitated? So that means you want to provide them with education, meaning you want to provide them a quality living experience. We're not talking about the Ritz, but we're talking about enough so that way when they come back out, they're ready and able to sort of reassimilate back into society. So you change the way people are paid, you change the incentives that they have. So to me, when it comes to private prisons, the biggest issue is not whether the prisons are private or public, but the incentives in how people get paid, and the incentive to the different actors. Because again, there's also the whole incentive of politicians to over-criminalize, because when you over-criminalize things, call more things a criminal, always push for harsher enforcement of things, it always looks good from a politician's point of view because they can say they're tough on crime. Same thing with the whole criminal justice system, where from judges to prosecutors, there's never much of a penalty from being overly harsh, but there can be a penalty from not being harsh enough. So, if you're a judge and you decide on guilty and decide on harsher penalties, again, you can say you're tough on crime. But if you give too light a penalty, and then suddenly it turns out that person was really bad, well, then there is harm to you. Same thing and also makes it harder for them to advance in their careers, because if you're a prosecutor, you want to win every case, whether the person you're prosecuting is innocent or guilty, because that's how you advance. So it's just like there's a lot of different weird incentives along the way. And we haven't been able to discover new incentives because there isn't really a competitive market to try different things in. Okay. So that's prisons. Now, let's talk about healthcare. Now, when you go to a place like McDonald's or any place, McDonald's is going to try to make your experience as pleasant as possible. Now, again, we've all been to a McDonald's where our experience wasn't necessarily as pleasant as possible, but the idea is they try to get your food fast, they try to make your food affordable, and they try to make it taste good. And if you have a concern, like they forget something on your sandwich, or they forget your order, they'll oftentimes fix the problem. And the reason for this is because you get to choose whether you buy food from McDonald's or not. So since you're the person with the choosing power, okay, which we'll revisit that concept back to prisons in a moment. But if you're the person with the choosing power, then people cater to you. Okay, people cater to you. And that's not what we have in healthcare. So the healthcare consumer, the person who goes to the doctor doesn't really get to make the choice to pay. Instead, it's their insurance company who makes the choice to pay. So the doctor's practice is oftentimes very tailored to catering to insurance companies to make sure they get paid as quickly as possible. Okay, because that's a big issue for doctors' cash flow. Okay, and that's why they overcharge, because it takes them so long to collect from the insurance companies. They got to make sure they collect enough when they do to make up for the money that they're waiting for. So because you have this really slow insurance system, but the insurance companies that you have isn't chosen by you. It's oftentimes chosen by your employer. So insurance company's product isn't catered to you, it's catered to the employer. So in that case, they're trying to figure out how to make it easier for the employer to manage, from an HR perspective, their healthcare system. So it's not so much about the benefits that they provide you. So in that case, what happens is that the person who's most in tune with this particular good or service, the healthcare consumer, is a person with the least agency, which creates no incentives for anybody to optimize to the consumer. Okay, and now if you just replaced insurance companies and your employer with government, well then doctors would just optimize towards what the government wants, so that way they can get paid by the government. They still wouldn't necessarily be optimizing to the consumer. At the end of the day, you want a consumer-oriented healthcare market where consumers pay for their care directly, whether it be through subscription models like direct primary care, whether it be cash-only clinics where basically prices are sometimes like half what you would see at a normal medical establishment, because you pay up front. There's all sorts of different models, or basically, you get a catastrophic plan that cover really big expenses, but you pay for the basics out of pocket. This would cause prices to go down because it'd be, one, all sorts of different incentives, and then also not only just would the prices be down, but quality would be better because doctors would then be creating the practice. Like right now, most doctors will not let you talk to them over the phone because they want you to come back in so they can bill you for another appointment. Now there is starting to be some movement towards being able to actually call a doctor from your insurance company. But traditionally, doctors wouldn't want to do that. But if you paid a subscription fee to a doctor, like in direct primary care models, the doctor would be glad to take your call because they're going to get paid the same no matter what. So at the end of the day, they just care about how to make you happy, how to take care of you. So again, the difference is the payment schemes. Now, why does healthcare have such a weird payment scheme? It has a lot to do with government regulations, government rules, World War II. I really recommend reading the book, The Primal Prescription, by Robert Murphy and Doug McGuff, that really details sort of how healthcare in the U.S. became what it is. But again, it comes down to, does the person receiving service, does the consumer actually make the choice? So if you were to apply that logic back to prisons, you could actually even create a system where basically prisoners who behave well, who earn it, can suddenly get the ability to choose which prison they go in. And this would create competition among the prisons. So that way prisons would then be like, okay, we want to be the prisons that prisoners want to go to. So that way if you were to do that pay per prisoner model, the prisoners have some agency to create some incentives for private prisons to actually not be inhumane. But as long as prisoners have no agency, a lot of those abuses will occur. And again, paying for recidivism, which is another route that I mentioned, could achieve the same thing, but that's a much harder thing to do because paying for results, which is another thing people want in healthcare, it's a very difficult thing to do because how do you measure results? When does the payment occur? How does it occur? There's a lot of different things to kind of figure out and logistically. And the last one is education. So right now what happens in education is that government has subsidized student loans, so it makes it really easy for a student to get a loan. Now let's imagine a world without student loans. What would happen? You would go to a bank to get a student loan. The bank would care much more about what school you're going to, what degree you're pursuing, what your overall plan is for the loan, because their goal is to get paid back. So if you were going to go to school for a degree where your chances of having an income that can sustain that loan is a lot less, you probably won't be able to get the loan for it. Okay, and if you want to go be a doctor, you can probably get the loan for it. So you'd still be able to get loans, just and again, when you're that young, when you're like 18, 19, you don't know necessarily what you want to do with the rest of your life. Having that mechanism to prevent you from getting a loan for a career where you may not be happy with is not a bad thing. Okay, so basically, it might prevent you from making decisions that will affect you the rest of your life. But schools will then have a very difficult time trying to get people to enroll in those sort of lower income programs, meaning like when you get this degree, you're probably not going to have as high an income as other degrees. So in that case, instead of just charging the same tuition for everything, which is what they do now, so basically, if you're going to be a doctor, you're paying the same tuition as if you're going to go be a cultural studies teacher. Problem is, the cultural studies teacher is going to make a lot less money. So essentially, this is a transfer of wealth to medical students, because essentially their tuition is being subsidized by the cultural degree student under the current regime. And the only reason why they can get away with that is because it's so easy to get a student loan. There's no reason for universities to try something different. But if suddenly people had a tougher time getting a student loan, universities would have to change their pricing model to facilitate. So you might have some universities charging you less for a cultural studies degree. You'd get your cultural studies degree, and if you're happy, great. You're not in so much debt that you can't afford it to live. But if you're not happy with it, you didn't get into so much debt that you can't go back and get another degree and try again. So you do have a chance for a do-over in that scenario, because you're paying for what you're getting, okay? Instead of just paying the same price for no matter what you're getting. It's kind of like if I went to a Big Mac. It's like going to a McDonald's and then the Big Mac was the same price as a double cheeseburger, okay? Now maybe you just really like a double cheeseburger, and that makes you happy, so you pay for the double cheeseburger, but you're overpaying for the double cheeseburger, and the person getting the Big Mac is now underpaying because the double cheeseburger person is overpaying. That's essentially what's going on currently in universities, and the reason is because of government subsidizing student loans. So if government got out of the student loan business, it would change the incentives to create a more innovative pricing system that will actually give people better opportunities and more opportunities. So again, whether it's healthcare, whether it's prisons, whether it's education, oftentimes government intervention has screwed up the pricing system. So even though maybe the actors are private businesses, it's not necessarily a free market with free market outcomes, and not creating the right incentives that would exist in a free market because of these interventions in the past or currently. So hopefully you guys found that interesting. My name's Alex Merced. You can learn a lot more over there at alexmerced.com, learneconomicsnow.com, libertarian101.com, and bitcoinblockchaincrypto.com. You'll see all my social media links on the screen. Follow me on social media. Have a great day and enjoy.